Welcome back. Washington Post headline from October of 2023, Biden gives fewer press interviews. Here is one from the New York Times, April 2023, Biden holds fewest news conferences since Reagan. Here's one, CNN 2022. Joe Biden did half as many news conferences as Donald Trump. And so it does seem like this is a deliberate strategy on the part of the White House. And to pick up the clip that Kim was referencing, this is President Biden mixing up the French president with a previous president who died in 1996. He is speaking in Las Vegas at a campaign event.
Right after I was elected, I went to what they call a G7 meeting, all the NATO leaders. I was in South England. And I sat down and I said, America's back. And Mitterrand from from France looked at me and said, you know, how long are you back for? And I looked at him, and the Chancellor of Germany said, what would you say, Mr. President?
Bill, what do you make of that? The response from the White House is probably that everybody makes mistakes. And by the way, didn't Donald Trump just confuse Nancy Pelosi with Nikki Haley? Maybe it's a fair point. We have an 81-year-old running against potentially a 77-year-old.
Yeah, except that Joe Biden does this like every week. We have a new thing. Individually, it might be excused, but it also explains his strategies. Kim says not giving interviews. I think the most egregious thing is not explaining his policies, not having a televised address from the Oval Office, for example, to explain what he wants to do in Ukraine and what he wants to do in the Middle East. And it may be because his aides don't think it will help him. When you listen to a clip like this, where he talks about Mitterrand instead of Macron, you see maybe it makes sense. Both Donald Trump and Joe Biden are kind of getting ahead by violating the rules. You know, the informal rules like you give a Super Bowl interview or so forth. Clearly, they don't want him exposed except under really tightly controlled conditions. Donald Trump, we saw that with the debates. He decided, I'm not going to participate. I think that was a disservice to Republican voters, but it probably helped them by diminishing the seriousness of the debates, diminishing the other contenders all to a second-class candidates. So unfair. And I think going forward, what's going to happen, I don't think Joe Biden is going to want to debate and is going to try not to. And everyone says, at some point he'll have to. I'm not so sure about that. I think the press is covered for him, and they'll cover again. If you look at it, what would you rather take the heat for? Not debating, not giving press interviews, or giving one and saying something really stupid?
But Kim, how long do you think that Joe Biden can keep this up? The voters are going to want to see him out on the campaign trail, I assume some, and maybe those would be limited stops where he comes out of Air Force One and gives some kind of speech, or White House speeches, Rose Garden speeches. I do think that Bill is maybe right about the debates here. We may not have any debates in the fall. And one thing that the White House would be able to say is, why would we debate Donald Trump? Donald Trump refused to debate Nikki Haley. And so he's not playing by the rules. The Republicans have said they're not going to accept the debate invitations that are set up by the nonpartisan commission that has run this process for decades. But I do wonder whether the White House will be able to keep up that line all the way to November if they're asking voters to come out and support the president.
Well, it is amusing. I saw just the other day, Donald Trump is now trying to goad Joe Biden into agreeing to debate him, essentially calling him a chicken, which is hilarious, just given that he won't, as you say, debate Nikki Haley. Although I suppose self-awareness isn't high on the priority list in presidential campaigns. But I mean, the question of how long can he do this? The sad reality is we know from 2020, he could probably do it the entire campaign. He got away with campaigning from his basement. Now, will there be as much tolerance for that this time around, given that he doesn't have the excuse of COVID, et cetera? Maybe not. But we do know the media is always giving him passes for things that they would not give passes to other candidates for. I suspect that what he's going to do is a continuation of what we've seen, which are these very tightly managed and choreographed in-person events where he chooses some industry he wants to highlight or some town where the federal government can claim it gave assistance or some specific voting group that they want to highlight. They'll roll him out. He'll wave, give a little pre-planned speech, a few comments, have a lot of supporters get up and speak on his behalf, and they'll call that a campaign event or a rally. I don't know how this hurts him overall, though, because I think you're right, Kyle. At a certain point, people are going to say, you're in charge. And given that one of the biggest issues for Americans these days is his age and concerns about his competency, the duck and hide strategy very well could backfire on them.
We're still a long way from November, and there no doubt will be events that intrude on the arguments being made by these presidential campaigns as well. And Bill, your column this week is on that. The headline is Iran may be the 2024 election spoiler, if listeners want to go find that and give it a read. But what is the argument that you're making?
Well, Iran has done this before. In 1980, they really killed Jimmy Carter's chance at re-election. The hostage crisis started the November before in 1979, ran through the election, and it just underscored Jimmy Carter's weakness. Now Iran is back at it, and I'm not sure Biden is going to be strong enough in his responses. I think he hasn't been strong enough thus far to look strong and to get them to stop. So I think that could undermine his thing. That'll accentuate his age, the feeling that people have he's not up to it. And remember, the other two issues plaguing Jimmy Carter were inflation and Afghanistan. In Carter's case, it was the 79 invasion of Afghanistan, which took him by complete surprise, as he admitted, and inflation, which was very high. And in contrast to Joe Biden, Jimmy Carter actually toughened the policy toward the Soviets after the invasion. So I just think that it's going to accentuate his weakness and lead to people concluding he's just not strong enough for the job. Too old. The Mitterrand thing doesn't help. I think all that's going to go in it. And I expect other bad actors from Russia, North Korea to China are going to take advantage of the Iran crisis to create their own mischief.
Hang tight. We'll be right back after one more break. Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. Let's take a couple of listener questions on Friday's podcast, which was about Texas's invocation of this constitutional clause about a state's right of self-defense in times of invasion. And Josh, who calls himself a proud citizen of Texas, says this: while I agree that likening mass migration to a military invasion seems exaggerated, the fact remains that over 150 individuals on the terror watch list were detected entering the U.S., and Mexican drug cartels are known to fly drones over Texas to evade border patrols for drug trafficking. These instances appear to edge closer to what could be considered an invasion. I'm eager to hear your thoughts on this. And my understanding is there's not been a lot of litigation over the meaning of invasion in these constitutional clauses. I would point to one authority here. Here's a white paper by the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And just to summarize some of this, in their view, the American history of the term invasion reveals that its literal meaning is entry plus enmity. Entry alone, which is trespass, is not sufficient to constitute an invasion. They say that is the clear sense of the founding generation. However, past non-state actors like pirates and barbarians fell under the category of invaders, in the opinion of certain American statesmen such as Madison, meaning that present-day non-state actors like cartel-affiliated gangs operating within the territory of a U.S. state may also fall under the category of invaders. So that is a little bit of the history and the legal view on the term invasion. And there may be instances where Texas would be able to act against cartels in a way that would at least arguably qualify under this invasion clause, but it does not seem to me like setting up border wire in order to block economic migrants fits that clause. Peter also says he was confused about the section of the Constitution that I quoted. And here it is again. It says that no state without the consent of Congress may engage in war unless actually invaded. And then he points to the next phrase, which is, or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. And he says that that appears to be a broader authority and wonders why I did not quote that. And the short answer is that that is not the section of the Constitution that Texas Governor Greg Abbott is pointing to. He is saying, this is his letter from January 24th, he is saying that the federal government has promised to protect states against invasion, and he has already declared an invasion under this clause. And so that's the short answer. The longer answer is I'm not sure how much that extra phrase actually helps his argument, because courts generally interpret the meanings of words by the company they keep. And so if you have a constitutional clause that says states may not engage in war unless actually invaded or in imminent danger, I guess I read that, Kim, as imminent danger, something like an invasion. Again, if you go back to the history, you're thinking about this clause, the founders imagining some far-flung state might be facing an invasion and may need to respond to it before they can get word to Washington, before word from Washington can get back. And I think that extra addition of imminent danger means that if you spot the invasion fleet off the coast or over the border, you don't have to wait until it actually touches your territory. The governor can begin to respond to that of his own authority. But I don't think that you can read danger to mean anything. Otherwise, there are states that may say we are in imminent danger from climate change, or we are in imminent financial danger of bankruptcy, and unlock all sorts of powers that, Kim, again, at least to my view, are not encompassed by the actual meaning of this clause in the Constitution.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think both of these listeners asked some really good questions, because if this is litigated and if it goes up through the court system, these are the kind of questions that the justices are going to have to wrestle with. You know, in my mind, I think you make a good point, though, is that I would have to imagine that especially the textualists in the court system would be looking at this in the context of what the founders meant at the time that it was being written. Your point about distance and communication is a really good one. You know, that particular clause, in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay, certainly suggests a situation in which, right, like there's no time for the federal government to get there and do the defending that needs to be done to defend against invaders. It doesn't necessarily point to a situation in which states can just, even though they've spoken to the federal government, don't like the federal government's response, make their own decision about what counts as a threat to the nation's borders. Because we do live in this federalist system in which these powers are divided. And in this particular case, on the issue of border defense and immigration, the courts have long held the federal government to be preeminent, even if, as let me stress yet again and again, the Biden administration is doing an absolutely abysmal job of that. The invasion question is also really fascinating, especially when you do start talking about drones breaching American airspace. You know, we had another example of this a little more than a year ago when we had a Chinese spy balloon floating over the country as well, too. And people actually also having a debate at that moment about whether or not that qualified as a form of invasion. And so, again, big, huge, interesting questions for the court. The one thing I would point out here, though, is that it does worry me that we seem to be having so many conversations these days about unprecedented lawsuits and issues that the courts have never addressed. I think it's sort of a statement of some of the dysfunction of government at the moment, that so many people feel that they're having to go to the courts to get clarity on things that no one's ever thought through much before, because of the actions or inactions of the federal government, which are causing us to experience various crises, whether it be the first-time indictment of a former president or the question of a failure to manage and police our borders.
Thank you, Kim and Bill. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com, and we do read our email. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.